legitimacy. In a world of so much wealth, levels of poverty and inequality continue to be stubbornly high, while mass migration, due to armed conflicts and a lack of opportunities, international terrorism, transnational crime and geopolitical tensions, pose challenges that cooperation mechanisms and governance that have prevailed over the last 8 decades are clearly behind in responding to. The lack of tangible results, inefficacy perceived in multilateral institutions, and difficulties in addressing global problems in an effective manner have led to frustration and have led to an increase in the sense that national interests should prevail over multilateral cooperation. The imposition of certain trends or cultural or ideological approaches is perceived, not wrongly, as interference in sovereignty and in national values that erodes trust and weakens willingness to cooperate in the multilateral sphere. As a result, we are seeing growing levels of distrust between member states that makes cooperation and the willingness to commit to things of common good difficult. The 2008 crisis, the pandemic, and now the conflict in Ukraine have laid bare the weaknesses and the limitations of multilateral institutions in their ability to tackle global challenges and systemic risks. The United Nations, in the last case, and its Security Council have adopted measures whose results, sadly, are far from being encouraging. Despite having suffered the misfortune of 2 unfair wars, one that put us to the edge of extinction as a nation, the spirit and the history of Paraguay compel us to choose dialogue, and not force, as a mechanism to settle any dispute. And this is shown in the Gondra Convention of 1924, proposed by a distinguished Paraguayan and approved by all Latin American countries unanimously without a single amendment, and its purpose was precisely to avoid and to prevent wars between states in the Americas. Humbly, however, with a sense of conviction, we urge for all parties involved in this conflict to immediately put an end to military actions and to avoid further victim and harm. We support peace initiatives driven forward by Brazil, a kindred country and a strategic ally, as well as by Pope Francis, whose moving presence is a source of inspiration for the whole of humanity. There can be no doubt that we need to work to revise and to reform the mechanisms, means, and institutional capacities of multilateral organisations in order to avoid new wars like the one that is afflicting Ukraine. However, with or without reforms, we need to put an end to the terrible loss of so many human lives. We must work to strengthen the United Nations in order to build new capacities to enable us to respond effectively and efficiently to the ongoing and changing global challenges. When it comes to the reform and expansion of the Security Council, Paraguay believes that the organic and functional structure of the United Nations should reflect the dynamics of the international stage in a participatory, democratic and equitable manner, as observed in the guiding principles of the Charter, to promote peace, security and prosperity in our countries in equal conditions. In this regard, the government of Paraguay expresses its support to the Republic of China, Taiwan, to become a comprehensive part of the United Nations system. Climate change is a great global challenge, and we must adopt both rigorous as well as fair measures to avoid further damage to the planet and its inhabitants. Trade restrictions based on criteria, such as agricultural practices or environmental standards, are bringing about discontent and uncertainty, and they are unfair and discriminatory barriers, because they seek to extrapolate realities from highly developed regions to developing countries, and they do not take account of their differences, nor do they adequately value the practices to mitigate the environmental effects in these areas. This implies that LDCs should assume responsibility for the environmental damage caused by industrialization in the 19th and 20th centuries, when mitigation measures didn't exist, and have the obligation to do this rather at the expense of turning down opportunities for trade expansion, creating jobs and wealth. It's necessary to address these concerns and to promote a more equitable and collaborative approach that takes account of the specific needs and realities of each country in the context of multilateral decisions related to environmental standards. Paraguay has shown the world that we are leaders in hydroelectric energy. We are a clean and sustainable source that meets both our own domestic needs as well as the needs of our neighbours. We have put Paraguay on the map as an example to follow in the transition to a more sustainable world. While other countries are still discussing reducing emissions, we have already taken concrete and effective measures. We are a concrete example of how a nation can use natural resources in a responsible and sustainable manner to promote economic development and at the same time to mitigate climate change. For more than 30 years, we have been adopting sustainable agro-fisheries practices that do not only ensure a prosperous future for our farmers, but also they guarantee the integrity of our land and our water resources. We have acted with a sense of courage and responsibility, basing our public policies on science and on evidence. For years, we were subject to criticism and finger-pointing, unfair finger-pointing. However, today, thanks to the work of several governments, I can certainly tell you that the facts speak for themselves. 44% of Paraguayan territory has conserved its forests. 95% of the legumes and cereals sowed in Paraguay in 2022 are using sustainable technology, such as direct sowing and crop rotation. And we've been free from deforestation since 2004 as a result of our zero deforestation policy. This data is a testament to the fact that it is possible to strike a balance between agricultural production and the conservation of our natural resources. And the Paraguayan countryside is ready to enter the most demanding international markets, respecting the principles of clean and sustainable production. However, we will not stop there. Paraguay is also committed to overhauling our natural ecosystems. We're promoting the reforestation and conservation of species, and we have undertaken the National Participatory Plan for Forest Restoration. We have also significantly reduced extreme poverty over the last 2 decades, showing that it is possible to protect our environment while prospering economically at the same time. Paraguay reaffirms its commitment to the values and to the central objectives of the United Nations. We understand our responsibilities. However, they are differentiated, and we are prepared to lead with example on the path to a more sustainable and equitable world. Today, we face 4 global challenges that are causing geopolitical tensions: access to water, food security, energy sufficiency, and the resilience of logistical chains. Because Paraguay is a power on these matters, we are called to be protagonists in the concert of nations. We have the largest global underwater reserves of fresh water, including the Guarani aquifer that we share with our neighbours. Paraguay is a global supplier of food, being one of the few countries in the world that is able to produce food for its population and for 100 million more people around the world. In hydroelectric energy, we are pioneers in regional electricity integration, and today we have decided to move towards even more efficiency and energy sustainability. Paraguay aspires to become the logistical centre of the South American bi-ocean road corridor, which turns our geographical central location into an opportunity and strengthens our integration with neighbouring countries and markets in the Pacific. This trade corridor will be a source of renovation and empowerment for Mercosur and the Alliance of the Pacific, promoting cooperation between both blocs. Further, thanks to the Paraguay-Paraná hydroway, this multimodal network will become the most competitive transporter of different products, facilitating the management of river transport. Without a doubt, this will give a fresh impulse to the process of South American integration and will transform the vision to resolve conflicts that may arise. Paraguay is determined to abandon the old image of an island surrounded by land, as described by the Cervantes laureate of Paraguay, Augusto Bastos, and following our historic geographical and cultural vocation to become the centre of South American integration. One of our main objectives is to contribute to improving regional integration. In this regard, the aquifers, the bi-ocean corridor, hydroelectric power stations, and navigation on our rivers are delicate processes of balance between integration and the sovereignty of our peoples. We are aware that the progress achieved towards integration, has been achieved towards integration. However, we are far from being satisfied, and we are making progress with courage and determination. Latin America is the region of the world with the highest potential for development. However, we will only be able to develop this potential if we respect ourselves, working together and in harmony, and by respecting each other. Since the last century, the 20th century, we have been moving as a country into a process whereby we are building and strengthening our democratic institutions. This year, we renewed this in our country with a transparent electoral process with broad participation from our citizens, where the Paraguayan people expressed their will with a firm democratic vocation and vested their trust in the rule of law. Paraguay today is living through the longest period of democratic coexistence, with more than 35 uninterrupted years of the values of free, participatory and pluralist democracy, convinced that there is no other acceptable system than being unshakable in upholding human rights and liberty. Paraguay, the country of the prose of Augusto Bastos, the universal music of José Asunción Flores, and guitar with its dulcet tones and Ñanduti lace, Berta Roas, this country has a real rhythm that was born in the spirit of the Guarani language. Now, we call this thing Guarania, and it goes around the world. It's a great ambassador for us. My country values peace and sustainable development and integration between peoples, because we are a country that has been reborn from the ashes, following a war of extermination that stunted the early development process of a nation that at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution had already developed one of the first interurban railways of South America. We had shipyards and iron foundries, but above all, we had great human capital and education. Then the massacre in 1870 that annihilated 90% of the male population of Paraguay. The reconstruction process after this was headed up by patriotic compatriots without financial nor technological support, and with a small flow of European migrants that arrived and established themselves in the country despite this bad record. However, as Bernardino Caballero said in his presidential message in 1884, Paraguay has the undeniable merit of having risen from the rubble without having requested support from the outside. We have been steadfast in this, the virtue of the strong, and triumphed, being the maker of our own destiny. It's impossible to not mention the fundamental role of Paraguayan women in their heroic task to rebuild the country. This is not in vain, because Paraguayan women are recognized as the greatest in the Americas, and they are the cornerstone of our nation. With decisive and firm steps forward, Paraguay continues to strengthen its institutionality and its economy. Having been the poorest country in South America for decades, today we are a middle to high-income country with high credibility for the international financial markets that are bring us close to the so yearned for investment graduation with high standards for production, certified production in line with international standards and transparency, especially in macroeconomic stability and fiscal discipline and monetary discipline in an ongoing effort to improve public management. Dear friends of the international community, Paraguay is stood to attention and is ready to discharge its mission before history. Thus, we are talking about the rise of a giant. However, we are not saying this in an expansionist way or a grandiose way, but rather with a firm conviction of a proud people, proud of its roots and our heroic history, our courageousness and the profound conviction of our destiny of greatness. Thank you very much.
Thank the President of the Republic of Paraguay for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Dina Ercilia Boluarte Zegara, President of the Republic of Peru. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome Her Excellency Dina Ercilia Boluarte Zegara, President of the Republic of Peru, and to invite her to address the Assembly.
Señor Presidente de la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas.
Distinguished President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, delegates from the nations of the world. I come from Peru, a country with a long history and vast cultural wealth, which has been the cradle of civilization on the American continent, and whose leadership I assumed with firmness and courage on December 7th, 2022, after a coup d'etat in the midst of a political and social crisis that we were able to overcome within the framework of our Constitution. Today, I have the honor of being the first constitutional female president of the Republic, as my country has existed for 201 years. And today, I lead my country's delegation to the United Nations General Assembly. I am grateful to the international community for its recognition. Peru is once again present on the international stage alongside the peoples of the world. I'm a woman from the provinces. I speak Quechua, and I was born in the heights of the southern Peruvian Andes. And I lead a government that, in accordance with the law and in the face of titanic challenges, both from nature as well as on the international stage, has brought back stability and hope to a country that seeks to achieve economic development along with social justice. I would like to begin this message by paying a tribute to women, to girls, adolescents, and particularly to my sisters in Peru, a well-deserved tribute. Amanda Warmi Makai Kachunchu. This is what we say in Quechua, which in the rest of the world means no more violence against women. Mr. President, Peru is a country that respects democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and international law. For this reason, Peru actively promotes Latin American integration and is firmly committed to cooperation between countries. Peru promotes peace, and to achieve peace, it is necessary to implement the Charter of the United Nations and to uphold it in all circumstances. For this reason, Mr. President, we defend the principle of respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of all states. Mr. President, as a daughter of the southern Andean region of my country, I've known firsthand the suffering caused by poverty. That is why I'm fully aware that, as we reaffirmed in the political declaration adopted yesterday, eradicating poverty is the greatest challenge facing the world and constitutes an essential prerequisite for sustainable development. This is the main objective of my government, and it is why we are committed to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals of the 2030 Agenda. Today, in this forum, I wish to reaffirm Peru's voice so that the international community gives the highest priority to eradicating poverty. It is a commitment on which we cannot and should not give up. In Peru, we are adopting policies to confront not only monetary poverty, but also multidimensional poverty, among other important measures such as access to drinking water and basic sanitation. In the 9 months of my government's existence, we have unblocked more than 100 paralyzed projects in order to provide water to the sisters and brothers in my country. The crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, growing geopolitical tensions, conflicts, and growing food prices are overwhelming our people, and they have slowed down our potential for growth and development. If these trends continue, as Secretary General Antonio Guterres tells us, nearly 600 million people will continue to live in extreme poverty in 2030, and only 1/3 of countries will reach the goal of having their national poverty levels. We cannot accept such a scenario, Mr. President. The time is now. Either we progress together or we all condemn ourselves to failure. United, we will achieve everything. Disunited, we will all lose. And this brings us to the next challenge. Our development agenda has the motto, Manan Pitapas Kipapi Sekispa, which in Quechua means leaving no one behind. However, Mr. President, today, millions of human beings are displaced and on the move, sometimes literally carrying their families and their meager belongings in search of well-being or simply survival in the face of conflict, unemployment, and extreme poverty. The current situation of human mobility must prompt the international community to cooperate on the bilateral, regional, and multilateral levels. Peru has been making enormous efforts in this area, but it is only through international cooperation that we will be able to achieve safe, orderly, and regular migration. Mr. President, health, as we know, is not a problem for a handful of individuals. It is a collective issue. My country was one of the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, which took the lives of more than 200,000 of our fellow citizens, and which revealed the gaps and shortcomings of our health system. And this year, we have faced resurgencies of the dengue, measles, and polio epidemics, as well as an outbreak of Guillain-Barré syndrome. That is why my government is firmly committed to guaranteeing free and universal healthcare access to all without exception. To achieve this, we are in the process of expanding our national vaccination programs coverage. We are reinforcing health infrastructure and equipment. We have been able to achieve more than 1,900,000 children aged from 2 months to 5 years against polio and measles. And we continue to work tirelessly to unblock hospital projects that had been paralyzed due to apathy and corruption from prior governments. We have also made the prevention and treatment of cancer a national goal, and currently 20 out of Peru's 26 regions have at least one oncological service. It is possible to work and to achieve things as long as the political will is there. In these areas, international cooperation must ensure quality health products and services accessible to all, and especially for developing countries where the gaps are much wider. In Peru, it is with great concern that we observe the growing internationalization of criminal networks fueled by the corruption of past governments, which have undermined the credibility of institutions and democracy and which are affecting the development and well-being of our citizens. That is why it is crucial to reinforce our common work. We cannot let our guard down against crime, organized crime, and drug trafficking. These problems affect us all, and we must all be part of the solution. Our children and grandchildren are at risk of experiencing the hell that a triple environmental crisis would bring now that we are entering this era of global boiling, as the Secretary General of the United Nations has called it. Climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution put our very existence as humanity at risk. Peru is facing these phenomena with a sense of urgency and determination. At the beginning of the year, heavy rains affected northern Peru, followed by the onslaught of Cyclone Yaku. In the south, droughts have seriously harmed people, agriculture, and livestock, on top of recurring anomalous waves in the Pacific, which prevent the regular operations of our fishing ports. Finally, we have the growing threat of the coastal El Niño phenomenon. After the impact of the global El Niño, an action-focused and prevention-focused approach is urgent. Therefore, from this high rostrum, I call for solidarity and international cooperation. For the first time, a government in my country has undertaken a major campaign against the global El Niño phenomenon with an investment of 4 billion soles, that is to say more than $1 billion. We have also joined the early alerts for all initiative presented by the Secretary General, so that by the end of 2027, all the inhabitants of the planet can be protected against meteorological phenomenon. This, ladies and gentlemen, will help save many lives. In addition, Mr. President, allow me to make a proposal for a compact, a commitment to